ManageIQ Sprint 148 review. This is a regular 2-week sprint that just ended 2 days ago on Monday. As usual, I'll give the overview. Harpreet will give us an update on the UI, Adam on the providers, Joe V on the platform, Alberto on the API, and Jason on what's new for developers. One of the big highlights is that the Kasparov branch has been cut. There's a talk article there that Jason wrote. We're working on the first Kasparov build now, and once that's out, we're hoping the community will help us stabilize it. Amongst other things, there are 4 new providers there, the IBM Cloud, the NSXT, IBM Terraform, and the IBM AutoSDE. There is provider tag mapping, provisioning VMware VMs via content library, improved UI API session management, increased performance of the ManageIQ API, and a bunch more stuff. A full list will be in the upcoming blog post. And master is now set to the to the L release, and that will be named after Emmanuel Lasker, who was the longest running world chess world champion at, I think, 27 years. So nobody has even come close to his record yet. So on to what's happened this sprint. So we're continuing to see a major uptrend in pull requests merged and pull requests opened. I think there's a lot of stuff happening on the developer side, and I think that's kind of spiking the numbers, in addition to all the contributions that we've been getting from IBM people. As you can see there, the purple stuff on the top, the other, that's kind of what's spiking a lot of the numbers there. There were 107 enhancements and 45 bug fixes, so we're relatively stable, I would say, on bug fixes, as you can see, across pretty much all the sprints, somewhere between 40 and 60. So that's been steady, but the enhancement counts have gone up. We should review that to make sure that those are actually accurate. Here are here's the health of the core repositories. I haven't noticed any major changes here. And here is the health of all the provider repositories. I think if we add one more, we're going to need multiple screens here for the provider repositories. So that's a good problem to have. All right. And with that, I'll turn it over to Harpreet.
Thank you, Oleg. Hello, everyone. Total of 32 PRs were merged in UI repos. Out of that, 5 were bug fixes, 13 enhancements, some developer and dependencies related PRs. As always, main enhancements and bugs are listed here with PR links. With that, over to the next slide, please. So a console link was added on a configuration system details screen. As you can see on the screen under Access button group, corresponding RBAC feature was added to the product features for this, and a similar button was added to configuration profiles during last sprint. Next slide, please. A new drop-down to select storage service was added on the Cloud Volume Create form when AutoSDE Network Manager type is being added. Next slide, please. Support was added to be able to add physical storage through UI, so you can see a new button attach a new storage system under configuration button group. Next slide, please. Finally, dashboard view was added. Dashboard view was added for storage managers, similar to other providers on the summary screen, where you can toggle between a textual or a dashboard view on the provider screen. So the screen also has that new feature now. And that is all for the UI for this time. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Harpreet. So for providers on the core side this sprint, we refactored the core persist or reconnect blocks. These are the sections of code that allow us to reconnect inventory which had been deleted, and we're trying to bring it back. There were multiple copies of this that were very similar, so we standardized on one and removed a bunch of duplication there. We also removed the relatively complicated find and lookup host code blocks from the legacy save inventory. This was used in order to bring back hosts which had been removed from inventory on another provider. And with the move over to graph refresh for everything, we no longer need this complexity in the legacy save inventory code, which at this point is only being used by SmartState. We also moved the VMware specific assign EMS created on post refresh code to the VMware repository. What this was doing was after a refresh completed, it was looking to the EMS events to see if we could find out when a VMware VM was created. Turns out that it was doing looking for VMware specific events and also connecting to a VMware API in the core VMware template model, which is obviously breaking pluggability. So we moved that over to the VMware repo, and given that in 6.7 we're actually able to get this from inventory without having to look at events, we might actually delete it completely. Keenan also moved some migrations that were in the storage manager mix-in to add a storage manager for the OpenStack provider to the cloud manager, moved it out of the models and into a proper data migration to clean that up. Next slide. On the Amazon side, we fixed a missing SmartState Docker credentials form. So in order to do SmartState on Amazon, you have to provide credentials to pull the SmartState image from the Red Hat Docker repository. And when we switched over to using DDF forms for the Amazon cloud, we missed the ability to enter these credentials, so it's been added back. And on the Google provider, Drew updated the Google Auth gem, which allowed us to bump Google Auth, fog Google to the latest versions, and also opened us up to be able to upgrade to Faraday, I believe 1.0 now. Next slide. A bunch of nice enhancements on the IBM cloud side. So for Power Virtual Servers, they're now filtering on the cloud volume type when attaching and provisioning. So for Power Virtual Servers, the different storage volumes have a volume type, and all of the volumes have to be of the same type. So when you're assigning a cloud volume to a new instance or to an instance, we filter based on the volume types that that instance already has. And when provisioning, we make sure that you can only select cloud volumes that are all the same volume type. They also added support for provisioning to a public cloud network. They have two different types of cloud networks, public and private, and needed to make a little change to allow you to assign an instance to a public cloud network when provisioning. On the VPC side for IBM Cloud, they added the ability to cross-link cloud volumes to the availability zone that they're in. And on the IBM Terraform side, they added icons for configured systems that are coming from vendors that we don't have providers for. So for instance, you could have provisioned an Alibaba instance with IBM Terraform, and now you'll see the Alibaba vendor icon on that configured system. For OpenStack, we fixed the child storage manager initialization. It was actually being initialized before creating the storage manager, so it wasn't setting the zone and the tenants properly. And we also allow the ability to run specs without having Qpid Proton installed. This is a problem mostly for people who don't have the C libraries installed. Before, if you try to run the specs on OpenStack, they would fail, and now it just skips any specs which depend on Qpid Proton. For VMware NSXT, we added support for Data Center Federation, which is also called the Global Manager for NSXT. So you can have global and local region managers. We can now connect to the global manager and we'll roll up all the inventory. For vSphere, we now hash the license key to use for the license manager EMS ref instead of using the full license, which is not great to store that in the database. We also fixed reconnection of VMs and hosts. Previously, this was using the EMS ref to try to reconnect them. But on VMware, since you can drop hosts and VMs out of one vCenter and add it to another, the EMS ref isn't a good value to use. We previously used the BIOS UUID and the host name, and now we're using that again on the graph refresh side. And we have the pleasure of having Iran here to give us a great overview of the new AutoSDE provider. So next slide, please, and over to Iran.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So Since it's the first time that I'm presenting AutoSDE, I will say a few words about AutoSDE. So AutoSDE is a project that was developed by IBM for the GTS organization. GTS is the Global Technology Services. It's the organization that put out for the customers the solution that fits for them. The solution usually take parts of several towers, which are storage, network, and compute, as you are familiar with ManageIQ. So AutoSDE stands for automation of software-defined environment, where software-defined environment is storage, network, compute, and resiliency. AutoSDE is currently in its first phase, which is a storage one. I don't know if you can proceed to the next slide. The goal of AutoSDE is to be an infrastructure as a service for GTS applications. And for the first phase, we will be able to provision and monitor storage systems with various vendors. And in the next phase, we will be able to connect also network and compute. Next slide, please, Adam. So I might have covered this slide also. For the Kasparov release, we added a new AutoSDE provider. The AutoSDE provider communicates with the AutoSDE manager, which then in turn communicates with the storage system. Currently, we are supporting StoreWise and XIV. As for the provider itself, so the provider ability is currently creating and deleting a volume and viewing the storage resources, which is also known as the pools. In the future, we will support safe deletion, snapshots, and so on. That's all about AutoSDE. I record the small demonstration of AutoSDE, or you, Adam, how we want to present that?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So a little bit on the block diagram. The AutoSDE manager has three objects that are currently reflected to the ManageIQ, which is storage system, storage resource, and storage volume. The AutoSDE manager communicates with the storage devices via a REST API, and to communicate with ManageIQ, it communicates with REST API also in the northbound, and the currently development was AutoSDE provider, which is the standalone provider, and there are several changes inside ManageIQ core and the UI classic and the API. This is the current changes that were made. In the future, we might be also take use of the automation part.
Hello, everybody.
So,
Sabari, I'm the development manager of AutoSDE. AutoSDE is a product that solves the issue of IT to be maintained, monitor, configure the storage, networking, and the compute sides of a center. In order to do that, AutoSDE uses the manager, and I will present you the provider that talks to that manager, and that will be entered to the Kasparov's version of ManageIQ. So we added under the storage section an option to add a provider. I will add here the AutoSDE provider. I will choose the default information. And I will put out the credential to validate. Once it was validated, I can edit manager. You can see that we have a new dashboard for that manager. You can see the credential is okay, and I will go ahead and refresh in order to Give us refresh time. Okay, so we can see that it was successfully refreshed. Now that the AutoSDE provider was added, we can go to storage and it will go ahead and attach a new storage system to the AutoSDE provider. I would call it MySVC. The type of it will be SVC, store-wide one. And I will put out here the credential for that system. If I will go back to the manager overview, I will refresh the relationship in order to reduce the sync time. We will give it a second to be refreshed. And the manager of AutoSDE will take a little bit of time in order to be able to connect to that system and retrieve all the information from the system. It can be up to 1 minute. I'm trying to refresh in order to reduce that time. Okay, so you can see that the physical storage was added. The system automatically retrieve the information of the relevant pools on that storage system, and we can go ahead and create for us a new volume on top of an existing pool. So we'll add a new cloud volume. I will choose my AutoSDE. I will call it Role 1. Size will be 7 giga, and I will create it under my pool. Okay, I can go ahead to the manager, my AutoSDE manager, and we can see here that the new volume was created. We can also see in the store-wide GUI in the volume section that the new volume I created is created here. Is online and is attached to the ManageIQ system. That's all.
All right, thanks so much for that, Aran. And that's it for providers. Over to Joe.
Really impressive. It's great to see that kind of progress there. It's encouraging, very encouraging. Anyway, in the platform space, there were quite a few PRs merged this past sprint at 83. Some of that work is less interesting for things like testing Ruby 2.5.8 and 2.66 and doing some work to switch to ManageIQ style. Some of the more noteworthy PRs, starting with enhancements. One enhancement was contributed to Awesome Spawn to support running commands in detached mode. And a noteworthy documentation enhancement was made for walking folks through how to migrate their appliance deployments to running on pods. A bug fix was addressed where there was an error message that was displayed: an empty namespace may not be set during creation in the podified deployments. And this was addressed by skipping reconciling the OIDC client secret if it's not being specified. Next slide, please. And just to give a nod to all the work that was done in the documentation space and listed here for folks who are interested. I'm not going to go through each of these, but there was a fair amount of work again this sprint, like last sprint, to contribute to improving our docs. Next slide, please. And likewise with the build. I won't go through these. I know some folks are interested, but so I thought it'd be valuable to list on the slide. But it just reflects the fair amount of work that was done by the team to get a lot of build improvements out. And that's it for the platform space this sprint. Off to Alberto.
Thanks, Joe. Yep, so this sprint we had quite a few enhancements that came into the API, all by David H. He's been quite busy. Let's see. A lot of these things are, to help leverage the API from the new UI, the DF-driven UI. Okay, so the first enhancement, we needed to shift the auth key pair, creation to go to async mode. So again, the signature is the same for the post, but in the results, you'll get the action result signature, which tells you the success, the message. But in addition, you'll also see a task ID and href that you can query for the status of the creation. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the API, traditionally, originally we had the post verb available for creation and optionally with the edit action and some deletes. But what David did is also enabled a lot of the one that did not have the put and patch verbs on these. So kind of completing the rest. So put and patch being equivalent to the post create and edit action. So similar mechanism in the back. Okay, so for the first one, he's enabled put, patch, and delete on the cloud networks. Next one on the API actions. Third one was put and patch on services. The next slide, please. Okay, so also he enabled the put and patch on policy profiles, the alert definition profiles, and finally the chargeback rate resources. And next slide. Okay, so also to help drive the UI, David also enhanced the options verb for API actions to also return the action types available. So you can see here in the data section of the options hash the different available action types that can be rendered. And that's it for the rest. Next is Jason.
Okay. On the developer side, Brandon did a lot of work over more than this sprint for a number of sprints on moving all of our style for RuboCop and other tools into a separate gem. So we have a new gem called ManageIQ Style, which centralizes the gems, but also centralizes the config of those gems, but also the actual versions. So when we want to upgrade RuboCop, we can do it in one place, and all of the plugins will get the update. I've also moved some of the voting issues where we decide on what the style should look like. I've moved those where they were previously, which was in the guides repo, now over to this new ManageIQ Style repo. If there's things about the style you don't like, you can open issues in ManageIQ Style, and we can discuss them there and figure out how we want to move forward. Another great update for developers that was merged, also written a long time ago, but finally got merged, was by Nick Lamoro, and he added a cross-repo tests command to the MIQ bot. So previously, if you wanted to run cross-repo tests, you had to create a PR manually in the cross-repo tests repo, and you had to know how to structure it properly, and it's kind of complicated. Now there's a new command on the bot. You run at MIQ bot cross repo tests. You give it the list of repos that you want to test, and then if there's any extra repos that you need to include, for example, if you make changes to a third-party gem, or in this case, in my example, I changed the schema, you say including, and then the list of repos, comma, separated there. And the bot will create that PR for you and link it back to the original issue. Should make cross-repo tests a lot simpler. And also reviewers, if you see a PR and you think it needs cross-repo tests, now instead of asking the developer, you can just ask the bot and it will do it for you. And that's it on the developer side.
All right, and I think that brings our Sprint 148 to a close. Sprint 149 is in 2 weeks, as usual. That should be November 11th. And I would like to thank everyone who contributed this sprint and to improving ManageIQ and to all the presenters. A big shout out to all of you guys for putting together the slides and the demos and for making this sprint review great. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.